Juliana Oliveira Domingues, Caio Mario Pereira Neto, Vinicius Klein. Very warm welcome to the Digital Markets Research Hub, a small corner on YouTube where we try to discuss the latest development in competition policy and digital markets. And I'm very grateful to you for your availability, because we plan today to discuss the development in one of the most impactful jurisdictions, which we hear a lot is going on in Brazil. So you are all three experts in Brazilian competition law and regulation of digital markets. So I'm very glad we have this chance to discuss the latest. But obviously, we cannot discuss the latest without starting with the foundations. I'm sure not all of our listeners know the basic origins of Brazilian competition law. So maybe we can start the first round with this more introductory outline of Brazilian competition law and policy. Caio, how about you to start with this?
Sure, Alice. Can you hear me well? All right, thank you very much for having me. I mean, this hub has been very interesting to follow, so it's interesting to participate as well in this discussion. And it's a great pleasure to be here with Juliana and Vinicius, good friends from the Brazilian antitrust community. So let me try to put in a nutshell a bit of the history of Brazilian competition law. So our new rules of competition law really started in the 30s and 40s with the industrialization process of Brazil. Until the 30s, Brazil was really a rural economy. And industrialization started with President Getúlio Vargas in the 30s. And with that came a few rules trying to deal with competition policy and consumer protection, kind of like in a mixed way, in the late 30s and early 40s. But it was only in 1962 that we got our first law, so a full law on competition law. In 62, we had that law. But from the 60s to the late 80s, we had a very regulated economy with state-owned enterprises and the state really present in the economy, with many markets fairly controlled either by state-owned companies or by state regulation. So what we saw during this period was really some moments of application of the law, but not really a continuous application of competition law. So we've had a few cases, some discussions. CADE was already created in 1962, but in a different format with a different perspective. Then it came the 80s. The 80s was a very difficult period for Brazil. 80s and early 90s, we had hyperinflation. We had a huge fiscal crisis. So the model of economic development where the state was really leading the investment and leading the developments, that didn't work anymore. And we had this like 10 to 15 years of really lack of structure in economic policy, and hyperinflation took over. We had some changes in the competition law. We had a new law in 1991, and some attempts to use competition law as a way of curbing inflation, which didn't really work, as usually doesn't. But then we had the stabilization process in the mid-90s, right? So the Real plan, which was the change in our currency and the stabilization of inflation, really came in 1994. That changed everything, because it really set a new economic background into which the country could, again, have a more stable economy and more open economy, if you will, to market economy, right? So we had some privatizations going on in different fields. We had also, so the state was getting out of state-owned enterprises in many different areas, and getting more of a regulatory perspective from the state, less of an entrepreneurial perspective from the state. And with that, a new law came in that was really our first real competition law that enforcement came through and was really established as a new phase here. So this is 1994, we had our law 8884, and that restructured CADE, and it was applied in this new economic context with more open markets, and CADE really started building its reputation as an important institution of the Brazilian economy. That period lasted until 2011, 2012. So this consolidated CADE as an institution, as an important institution in the Brazilian economy. In 2011, we approved a new law, which reformed CADE and the competition law system at that point, and actually implemented for the first time also pre-merger notification system. Until then, Brazil had a post-merger analysis here. So there's a major change, also an institutional change, because it merged two entities, the Economic Law Secretariat that was in the Ministry of Justice with CADE that was an independent tribunal, and created a new CADE that was bigger, more structured, and that's the CADE that we know today. And I think it consolidated the trajectory that started in 1994 with the changes in the Brazilian economy. So in a nutshell, that would be my perspective, looking from the 30s to until today. But of course, Juliana and Vinicius, feel free to complement anything that I left out, and that could be useful here as well.
Thank you very much, Caio Mario. Let me pass the floor to Juliana, please.
Yes. So thank you first for this invitation. For me, it's a real pleasure to share this moment with you, with friends. And we have a typical day in Brasilia, cold day here in Brasilia, which is very special this moment too. But Caio was just giving you a short but brilliant highlight from the best moments of our history related to competition law in Brazil. And I think that finally, in 2011, we have this new law, the law that we usually say that is new, but it's not new anymore. But I remember that the law passed during November of 2011, but was enforced on the May of 2012. And in the beginning, everybody was really afraid about the merger review, because we had the post-merger review, and then finally we were on the same page of US and EU, and CADE was different. We had the structure of CADE separated. We have a part of the analysis in the Ministry of Justice, and we had also the Secretariat for Competition that is not related to the Ministry of Justice, but was in the economy. Now we can also have some bodies outside CADE helping some issues here, but the whole structure is together. It's something very important for us to guarantee also this facility that we have nowadays to make decisions in a faster way and be much more strategic in our cases. So I think this is really put Brazil closer to the best practices, and it was something really expected at that time, because we had for many times we had questions about the delay when we were dealing with cases, transactions that were already approved outside Brazil, simple cases, and they were waiting here in Brazil because we have the whole bureaucracy that is something very common in Latin America. And also, I think we had the moment that fighting cartels became just like our focus. In the beginning, it was really hard for us, but it was not right after this law, but in the end of 2000, we had this movement in Brazil it was possible at that time to deal with lenience agreements, and then we could see better proofs in the process, and then it was really possible to identify cartel cases here. And when the new law passed, we also have this huge moment with the car wash case that we had the boom of lenience agreements in Brazil and several cases in several fields. So just adding some comments to Caio, I think that maybe now Vinicius can add a little bit more, especially related to digital markets.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Vinicius, please, can you complement what has been said by two your peers earlier?
Hi, Alice. Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with Juliana and Caio, two friends from competition law and insurance community. I would like to highlight 2 points of our law that I think can be a way of comparing our law to other systems. One of the things is that after that the 90s, with the first law that structured CADE, we had in Brazil the discussion of antitrust revolution that can be a parallel to a more economic approach in EU or the antitrust revolution in the United States. And that movement came in the end with the creation of the Department of Economic Studies in our actual law. And that is, I think, is important when we discussing in the end digital markets, because the sophistication of economic proofs and theories of harm and things like that will demand a lot of economic expertise, and this structure now with a specific department for economic studies, I think is important. Another thing that Juliana said, and I think you can, I think that this is not common, it's not present in every jurisdiction, is the idea of the role of the Superintendent General in CADE in Brazil, because you have the tribunal that does the judgments, but most of the mergers and conducts that CADE analyzes are first analyzed by the Superintendent General, and just the ones that he thinks that you have a problem or a possible harm to competition goes to tribunal. So sometimes you talk about a lot about the tribunal, but in the CADE structure, the Superintendent General has a lot of power, because he does what was in the ministries before, the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Justice, and now he does the instruction of the process. He can ask for proof. The commissioners can ask after also for studies, economic studies, and the more help from economic experts. But he does like a first screening of the cases, and what he thinks doesn't promote any harm to competition, he can clear in the first round. And if no commissioner asks to review this decision, the decision is final. And so I think that's something that can be used in the comparison with other jurisdictions. And I think in CADE, if you compare maybe to United States, even if you have a Department of Economic Studies, I don't know if this department has the same status role as other jurisdictions, because the decision to investigate a case or to put a remedy, it's not a decision of the economic experts, it's a decision of the commissioners and the Superintendent General. So the decision, and I think nowadays you have a lot of people that have a law background in the tribunal. So I think in CADE you still have a more legal approach in this way of decisions, because the economic experts do some tasks, but the final decision is more from legal people with legal background.
This is very interesting, Vinicius, and it helps us to move to the second set of issues which I wanted to ask you to highlight for us. And maybe Juliana, we can start with you this round about institutional setting more clearly. The relationship maybe with the government, how independent the competition authority is, and obviously because we focus on digital, there are other agencies supposedly which regulate different aspects of digital economy or digital society. Do you have some institutional settings or some informal communication with kind of horizontal regulators? So these kind of issues it would be great to know more about them.
Right. So our relation with the other bodies that we have here, just recently, we had an authority that is dealing with data protection, right? So we have a specific law related to data. And then the authority just started like 3.5 years ago, not long time ago. And at that time, I was the Consumer Affairs Secretary in the Ministry of Justice, and many issues related to digital economy, but all the issues related to digital economy that we were dealing with, they also have a relation with the Consumer Protection Code, because we have a Consumer Protection Code, and of course we have our antitrust law. In thesis, they should, be more close than they really are. In the past, during the time that we have the Secretary of Economic Law inside the Ministry of Justice, one department was the Department for Consumer Defense Protection. But even at that time, when you talk with people that were there, they were not so close, and we expect this to be much more close than it is now. When we have the discussions at UNCTAD, for example, competition and consumer protection, they are together, and also now digital markets. And when I was there, of course, when I realized about the new agency, the first thing I did was to get closer, and then we have this cooperation act to act together in some cases. And of course, I have a good relation to CADE. Now I am here inside CADE, but I was close to CADE at the same moment. And we have a specific case, very interesting one, related to the WhatsApp privacy. And we started an investigation at the consumer branch. But since we realized that the national authority from data protection, they had the interest to work together, and also we could see that some issues were just going to, things related to the competence of CADE. We tried to work together, and it was great. It was an institutional, I think, a different way to work together. It's not generally what happened. Generally, everyone do whatever wants to do, but thinking about the impact of the case, and also that it was very transversal, right? We have these different laws with different competences and authorities that could do different things. It was much more, not only secure for us, giving, the legal certainty, but when you have three bodies together and one big company in the other side, I think we have much more bargain to achieve our goals. In fact, I would like to have this case as a good example that we can do it together. And it was in a very beginning of the case. So we had space to have a solution, not waiting for the whole process that here in Brazil is a real drama. Especially we have also the judiciary taking care of the issues that they generally don't have expertise to do. So what I think is that now CADE is very mature, even though we are still young compared to the other agencies, right? But much more because we are always inside the discussions, following the best practices. and we are open to do things together. Here, sometimes, of course, we have all the regulators here because we have problems with energy, gas, and other markets that we also have different regulations. And then it's good when you have this kind of proximity to the other bodies, then you can discuss the cases. Of course, sometimes you're gonna decide differently, but in the case I mentioned that was related to digital markets and to a big tech, I think it was the best solution for everybody, even considering the time that they really adjust all the proposals related to privacy in WhatsApp case. So I would like just to add that I think maybe it's a problem here, the way we teach sometimes some, fields. I like to be more transversal, and I don't close my eyes to the other fields in law, because what I see in the real cases in real life is that you always have, some other laws that are touched by the case, and then you have different competences that can come here and then think different from you, that you have the competition way of thinking. And I think we should try, I am trying as a professor, right, to do different for my students, to show them that, okay, here is the competition class, but we are going to talk about everything.
Absolutely, I think it goes in line with this kind of emergent trend, or not emerging, but maturing rather trend in other jurisdictions, trendsetters as well. Vinicius, let me revert to you on these institutional issues. Do you have some interesting observations about the specificity or maybe the relationship with the government? Does the government consider the competition agency as a kind of an instrument for pursuing some economic policy agenda, or rather as an autonomous controller of competition on the markets?
I think CADE has gained the independence in his history, and I think nowadays you can say that he doesn't have like an instrumental role, but he has his role as following, trying to enforce competition law objectives. I don't see this. I see CADE has gained also has gained a reputation as a place of great technical expertise. So in competition law, so I think in the setting of independence, I think CADE is in a good, a very high standard comparing to all good other countries. And in the past, as Caio has said, CADE had some other challenges. For instance, during the industrialization process, there was no point in following competition law if you control the prices by the state. And in the beginning of the 90s, maybe CADE had a good role, an important role in economic policy, because if you had a lot of privatizations and you open your economy, you are afraid of private monopolies and things like that. And this was a role of CADE, and CADE had a role in the stabilization of the country, I think, in the Plano Real in the 90s. But now I think there is no instrumental goal. CADE has independence to follow his mandate to enforce competition law.
Thank you very much, Vinicius. Caio, what are your views on this?
Just adding, I think, on the relationship between CADE and some sectoral regulators, I think, thinking about the institutional environment here, I think there's an interesting perspective in some markets, especially when you see more space for competition coming in, and that CADE many times identifies potential problems, and then regulators come after that and regulate those problems. So we saw that, for instance, in the early 2000s in telecommunications after privatization. CADE had a few important cases, especially in the wholesale market, where it found discrimination in access to parts of the network that are really difficult to duplicate. So kind of an essential facilities discussion. And after that, after those cases where CADE issued a few injunctions, the regulator came and regulated that piece of the wholesale market. So the same thing happened like in 2000, in the late 2000s, like close to 2010, in the payments card markets, right? So CADE started seeing and opening a few cases in the payment industry. And then the central bank got new powers to regulate payment systems, and many of the regulations came actually as a reaction to some of the antitrust activity in CADE, and regulating pieces of what CADE was investigating in some of these markets. And then you saw a decline in these payment system cases. So I think that's a very interesting piece of our institutional context here, where you see the competition authority taking the lead sometimes in some of these regulated markets, and pointing in directions where the regulators then come in and say, well, this is a potential problem. Let's see how we can regulate this in a different way that can help competition. So we're seeing this more and more in a few of these markets. And I think that's an interesting feature of what we're looking at.
Indeed. And it also helps us very well to move to the third set of issues, namely on the development of digital in digital markets, ex-ante, not necessarily competition policy, but maybe other aspects as well. I propose this round to begin with you, Vinicius. So how do you see this? What is going on do we see some comparable initiatives to the US and EU and UK and some other jurisdictions with DMA and similar bills in the parliament?
I think Brazil now have a lot of discussion about regulating internet and platforms. The main bill about platforms is the proposition 2768 that tries to put, it's like the DMA from Brazil, maybe, an attempt at least, tries to put some ex-ante competences in the telecommunications agency, not in CADE. It tries to separate things like exposed analysis and cases, litigation cases, that will stay in CADE, and ex-ante regulations will come from the telecom agency. This is interesting. This can have some problems of competence there. Have a lot of criticism in this kind of division of competences, but I think one of the points that this bill tries to address is the idea that the technical expertise that you need to regulate digital platforms. And the bill is not very clear in like the DMA that says that has a lot of obligations. It's more like broad goals to the telecom agency after the bill to regulate in other kind of regulations. But I think this comes from the idea that the telecom agency has a lot of expertise in more technical, not economical approach in this idea of networks and telecommunications networks and access to networks. And this is a bill that's in the Congress, it's being discussed, and it's more, it doesn't have these broad obligations, doesn't have this qualification in the same way as in DMA, but has this debate who's gonna do this work of regulating ex-ante. And telecom agency has said that they want to do it, and there is discussion about creating another agency, creating like a commission of agencies, or maybe staying CADE. So I think that's, I don't know the position of Juliana and Caio, but that's, I think, is the main proposition. We have a proposition about artificial intelligence that is in the Congress. We have a proposition about fake news and regulation focusing more on this question, also in the Congress. And these are, I think, the main initiatives, legislative initiatives in Brazil now.
Thank you very much. I already see in Juliana's eyes that she already has something to comment, but for the sake of maintaining order, Let us start with Caio. Caio, how would you explain to us the latest development in these propositions? Where are we currently in Brazilian context? Is it at the level of report, the age of reports, and just raising awareness, in addition to what has been said by Vinicius, or we are further than this?
Well, I think we're in different maturity points in different debates here. All is that would be my view here. So I think we have, I'd say, these three main propositions in Congress. So our DMA-like bill, that is the one that Vinicius mentioned. There is another that's usually called the fake news bill that I call the DSA-like bill that we would have here, and an artificial intelligence framework bill. That's, I think, three initiatives here. And I think they're in different levels of maturity here. I think we had a very intense debate in the first semester, especially, but in the past couple of years mostly, about this DSA-like bill, which is more focused on content moderation, transparency, and concerns about fake news, disinformation, fake accounts, and things like that. And that was fueled in the first semester because of the riots and the protests in early January in the country. That led Congress to have a very intense debate about that in the first semester. So I think that's probably the bill that's more debated at this point, although there is a lot of controversy in some of the measures that they're trying to implement there. That could lead to expanding liability for disinformation to digital platforms. So it's kind of like exceptions to immunity, like the Section 230 in the US that you have in our civil framework for the internet in Brazil, but in a very complex way of implementing it. On the other hand, there's also transparency obligations they're very good and I think very detailed in a way that could be helpful here. So maybe one way, and this went to a deadlock in Congress in the first semester, so I'm not sure whether this is going to advance in the second semester or not. Maybe one approach that could happen here with this DSA-like bill would be to work in layers, right? So first approve, for instance, a set of transparency measures. Then you go to more detailed moderation regulation and liability regulation, so on and so forth, so that you can build the regulation, not have this bill with like many different things to come in. And one point that is a problem in this bill as well is that, again, there's no regulator appointed there. So there's a big discussion who would be the one to enforce the bill. Anatel has came forward saying, no, I can enforce that as well. But it's a much different enforcement when you talk about content moderation and regulation of the infrastructure and telecommunications. So I think that's a very complicated issue that we need to deal with. But I would say that this is the bill that we had the most discussion so far. And then we have the DMA-like bill. It's a more competition perspective, which I agree with Vinicius. I think it's in much more earlier stages. This bill just came to Congress like late last year in a very broad and way of establishing some principles of, for instance, no discrimination, so on and so forth, and trying to have asymmetrical regulation in a way that it's going to be applied only to some platforms that control access. I mean, that would be similar to the gatekeepers. The gatekeeper concept in the DMA, but it's not really that, because it's just too broad right now. It's very, very broad in Brazil, that concept. So it's still, I think, in early stages of debate. I think it will benefit a lot from learning about the enforcement of the DMA in Europe, and I think it should look closely to what's going to happen with the DMA enforcement in Europe, and also the UK bill that I know that have been writing on as well, that I think is a different approach, as the German 19A is also a different approach. I think we need to look at all these different approaches before we jump in and start doing things that are way more complicated than I think it's anticipated at this point. So that would be my take here. And I think as for the artificial intelligence framework, I think it's in its early stages as well, although it's being, I think, as everywhere in the world, picking up from all this hype about ChatGPT and all the large language models that I think are really taking off. So this may, in my view, maybe accelerate depending on how we see the developments in the next few months, because this is just moving so fast that I think there may be call and public attention on artificial intelligence that will move Congress to push forward on this. So let's see, but I think that would be my view. In this scale of currently, I think the DSA-like bill is in the front of the debate, but other things may change and may actually accelerate, for instance, the artificial intelligence bill. Let's see how that moves.
Thank you very much, Caio. Juliana.
Thank you. I was just thinking here when I was listening to Caio and Vinicius, and I think we also have additional things happening in Brazil that cannot be ignored. The fact that we have now a new government, new people here, of course, everything that was ongoing. First of all, the new group need to believe that they are topics that must follow or go ahead in some way. We don't have now, or maybe we're going to have now, the real picture about the priority that we'll be giving to this discussion. But as Caio was mentioning, and Vinicius was also mentioning, I think at this time, what we can see here in Brazil, we see a better understanding of the main European proposal regarding digital markets in light of the Brazilian reality, of course, because what we need to do here, empower the Brazilian civil society to debate this. And it's not easy at all, even when you consider that part of the civil society cannot see or understand the relation of DMA, a Brazilian DMA, with antitrust and other regulations in the digital market. And of course, we have a bunch of possibilities, challenges, advantages and disadvantages, right? When we talk about any framework closer to DMA. And the debate you have in Europe is ahead. So we must follow it to try to understand it, understand what you faced already, and then think about the reality here in Brazil and how could you do it. One hypothesis was just, launched by the regulator from the telecom regulator. But I saw 5 years ago this kind of discussion when we were talking about the national agents for consumer for data protection. So some proposals that, CADE can do this. We don't need a new authority. So time to times, of course, you think you have the structure, you have already people to do and to deal with these issues. It was very difficult for the National Data Protection Authority to start to work. They had no place. They started at the civil ministry of the presidential. We have a building and then annex. It was a kind of, rules that were open for them to start the work, but without, any other support. And it's difficult when you think about the expertise that will be needed. And we need to start from the real beginning. That's why I think that the other authorities that in any case have any kind of relation with the issues that will be treated in the case of, we decide here to have, just like a Digital Market Act from Brazil, they need to be inside the discussion. And maybe with this, we can clear our minds to understand, taking into consideration the differences that we have, the status that we have, the institutional problems that we have, the priorities from the government, how we should do it. I think this is the 1 million question now.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Juliana. So I propose to have the next round focused on the Brazilian DMA. And now, Caio, it's your turn to start reflecting upon this proposal. Maybe you can provide us your vision, your exposition of the general atmosphere in society. What are the main stakeholders? How active they are in articulating their messages? Are we in the state of denial or the state of enthusiasm? How it will be enforced in practice? When do we can we anticipate? There are a myriad of questions. Obviously, purely juristic. Maybe you observe some interesting formulas. Is it more focused on fairness, or on contestability, or something third? What would be the relationship with ex post antitrust? So all this set of questions, if you can, cherry pick on some of these issues, it would be interesting to hear.
Sure, I can kick off here, Alice. So as I said, I think it's our DMA-like bill is really in an initial stage, at least in my view. So it's just going to start hearings in Congress. Congress is inviting different experts to participate in these hearings, and even like the talks that I've been participating in, hearing on the people that have been articulating this bill, clearly say that, look, this is an initial proposal that's going to go through intense debate, and most likely it's going to evolve in congressional during the congressional activity. So I think we should take this really at this point as a kickoff draft. And as I said, I'm not sure it's even the case of right now accelerating this discussion in a sense that we should benefit from looking at the next few months of enforcement of the DMA in Europe. Said that, I think it's a bill that it's very high level, as Vinicius presented, in a sense that it's very different from the DMA, that it doesn't have a long list of obligations, of ex-ante obligations. It's more of a general obligations, a set of principles, and then delegating to further regulation what would be the exact obligations to be imposed. So a big question mark that this bill brings, for instance, is who's going to regulate, right? So as Vinicius pointed out, because it's not clear in the bill, Anatel is being the one that's coming forward saying, look, we would like to be the regulators. We believe we are well positioned to do this. Although I think on the competition law side, CADE has much more experience than Anatel. So if we're thinking about an authority that has experience and with these tools, and if we don't want to go down the road of creating a new authority, which is a whole different ball game here, CADE would be a strong candidate, I would say, to lead the way here. So I think there's this big institutional issue that needs to be discussed in detail. If we want to keep it in an existing institution, or if we want to create a new institution, how we would go about that, and how to discuss that. There's a big issue about even the definition, what's going to be regulated. So if you think about the gatekeeper concept in the EU, or if you think about the companies of paramount significance across markets in Germany, or other concepts like that, I think the Brazilian concept is still very broad in a way that's not really well defined. It's trying to piggyback in a way on the core platform services definition of the DMA, but at the same time establishes some very low turnover thresholds as the entry point for becoming a gatekeeper, which really covers an area that's of many platforms in different positions. This becomes very challenging for any regulator to go down this road. So I think it's still a bill that is more of a conceptual idea of a direction to go than really a detailed proposition. So it needs a lot more discussion. As for societal, the climate in society, right? As you raised, and I think it's always important if you're thinking about congressional activity, that's what moves Congress, right? Anywhere in the world is really whether there is any big attention in that matter at that point. I don't think we are in that position at this point regarding the DMA-like bill, at least, in a sense that it's really being pushed by different stakeholders or anything like that in Brazil at this point. I don't see, for instance, major debates about competition law cases as we saw in Europe before this coming forward, or even the UK with the CMA being very active in cases that were very complicated and polemic. I think we're in a different position here. I'm not sure if Juliana and Vinicius agree, but I think even CADE's president has signaled in a way of saying, look, I'm not sure this is the moment yet of doing this. So I think there's less of this heat coming up. Of course, all big tech companies are I think, ever in the world concerned, and they participate in these debates very actively. But I see a different context in the DMA-like bill in comparison to the DSA-like bill, to the content moderation, disinformation, these discussions. This was very heated in the election period. This was very important in the riots in January. So there's, I think, genuinely an engagement of society and a concern with disinformation, a concern with the impact that it has on democratic institutions, that was really in a more heated way pushing the content moderation bill forward in a way that I don't see in the DMA-like bill that we have. So I think these are kind of the different contexts that I see, not only how intense the congressional activity has been and how it has led to more mature texts in each of these bills, but also the context of society and how it's pushing forward congressional activity.
Thank you very much, Caio. Juliana, I wanted to ask you, when we were observing these discussions in Europe and the UK, we obviously see the Commission, DG and CMA being the main drivers for this, saying that we don't have enough, we need more competences, we need to speed up the process, and listing the long catalog of all these kind of shortcomings and pitfalls, procedural delays, etc. How do you see this from being in CADE yourself, being one of the kind of leading functionaries there? Do you have enough regulatory toolkits in your hands already? Is it something which you're really eager to have, some additional ex-ante competences, or is it something which can be done maybe down the line later at some point? What is it how do you, not necessarily your view, how do you observe the atmosphere, institutional atmosphere there?
Right, I think it's quite common when we have new issues coming, and considering the fact that CADE is doing a good job in different markets and understands a lot about digital markets. We have groups discussing digital markets. We have here projects and people dealing with these cases. It's not something far to imagine that maybe CADE could be the best authority to do it, even though in the case of the bill presented, Anatel is defending the position that they can do it, right? The bill was presented by a steering committee of the Brazilian House of Representatives on November, I think. But they were claiming for a change to the Brazilian civil rights framework for the internet and the general telecommunications law. So that's why it would give Anatel the power to regulate and supervise digital platforms. Anatel then could be responsible for issue not only rules, but also applying sanctions, deciding the interpretation of the legislation. And of course, I think if happens to the decision that Anatel will do it, Anatel will need to take care of the situations related to the conflicts between laws, because every time we talk about competition, you can have different laws, you can have different regulators. CADE can also care and then analyze some cases related to, cases that I already discussed at Anatel, Senacom, other places. So it's quite common to see it happening. It's not something new for us. But what I think is different also from the bill, I think that the creation of the Digital Platform Oversight Fund, then we have like an annual fee, 2% of their revenue. The companies can, cooperate with this fund is something new. And also, I saw that they are establishing some penalties that can go up to 2% of the revenues in Brazil from the companies, and it's also considered in the past year of the operation, the last year of the operation. The practical things, I think it's not difficult for any regulator here in Brazil. It's not far from what we do day by day. The problem is, if you decide that it will be Anatel or CADE, we need this, cooperation, not to, the focus here at CADE is competition, always competition. So sometimes we have decisions, we had recently in the past decisions that are different from the regulators, from the central bank, for example. And of course, I can see that we can have the same problem here, of course, if it's outside CADE. CADE is prepared for it. CADE can deal with all the markets. The problem is that, then you need coordination to do it. Then we need more people. Then we need to take care if we have enough money to have these people here, right? And of course, it's a decision, it's a political decision, because if the decision is CADE, then we need to talk with the Ministry of Justice, because CADE is connected with the justice. If Anatel is going to do it, it's not justice, it's telecommunications. So I don't know from the political side if the ministries, they are talking about it. That's why I said to you that we have a new moment in Brazil. It's a new government. It's not clear for me if it is a priority or not. And then we can have some answers, and then we can see to the way they are deciding to go, or if at this time it's not something they will handle or put like a priority to go ahead, due to the fact that it's not something so simple to discuss, even inside, the federal institutions.
Thank you very much, Juliana, for this really detailed and open answer to this. Vinicius, how do you see this this specific issue?
I agree with Caio and Juliana. First of all, I agree with Caio that there is not, in the public discourse, the DMA, Brazilian DMA, the DMA like bill is not a top subject, a hot topic. Like, I think Brazil regulation is sexy, not competition in this debate. If you think about Shapiro and his famous article, because the discussion about regulating fake news and things like that, this is one that is in the hype, in the debate. And I think you think about public discourse, there is more confidence in regulating big techs or regulating platforms than waiting for exposed competition law litigation in Brazil. And I think another point that Caio presented is very important. Like in Brazil, the bill is not a reflection of litigation, of prior litigation, because you don't have so many. You have cases, but not so many remedies imposed in Brazil on digital markets as in European Union. So the bill is very broad in principles, and since it's in the first draft and it's an initial debate, I agree with that also, puts the competence on telecommunication agency, Anatel. The language is more focused on interoperability, access, and less on competition terms, innovation, things like that. That they think like when you have a transition to another kind of technology, Anatel did this in telecommunications and maybe could do that again. But this is, in my point of view, problematic, because if you think that the process of digitalization of markets is a broad process, maybe all the markets become digital, and if Anatel regulates the infrastructure of all markets, it's like a universal regulator, and it's going to have a lot of coordination issues, and the problems are transversal. So it's hard to think that you can, in my point of view, can pick just one part of the market, the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, and regulate that by an agency that will have effects on all markets, and try to do like a specific and partial regulation. I think that's going to be problematic, and they believe that they can mix that with exposed litigation from CADE, because in the bill they say, oh, this is not something that's going to take CADE's competence, so CADE will be able to enforce all decisions and all remedies. But this will demand a lot of coordination, as Juliana said, and this can happen like in the history of CADE and other regulators, as Caio and Juliana talked before. They had worked in frameworks about that. But in the case of digital markets, I think have more uncertainty, because you don't know how to regulate, have a lot of options. You had a lot of models, a lot of frameworks. And I think for Brazil, I also agree with Caio, caution is a better way of seeing things, because you have a lot of experience, and like European is a first mover in this approach of regulation to digital markets. And Brazil has a lot of consumers, not so many companies, and maybe it's good to wait if the Brussels effects from any Bradford maybe work something here. And after we see how the things go in other countries, we can do a better regulation here. These broad principles is just like us saying, oh, companies, you have someone that can regulate you, that's telecommunications agency. But the bill doesn't promote so much legal certainty, because it's broad principles, and Anatel could like do a more interventionist approach or a more minimalist approach to the regulation of digital platforms. So I think I have to discuss more the bill, as all the other people said, but it's the Brazilian start of the debate.
Thank you very much, Vinicius. I know we are approaching the end of the hour, so before asking you to offer your advice, recommendations to the young generation of competition lawyers and economists, I wanted also to ask maybe a short question about the maybe some specificity of the functioning of academic life in Brazil, and maybe your engagement with other Latin American countries and United States, because geographical distances are not as important these days as they were in the past, but still they keep some specificities. Maybe this time, Juliana, what would you like? For example, about this font which you mentioned, I learned about it at a Scholar conference, which we all attended earlier this month, actually, in Very Welcome in Athens. And it shows in reality how much we learn from each other at this type of events. Do you have something similar? How you communicate with other academics? Because we all also academics, so this kind of issues.
Right. I like very much to be inside, following the discussions outside Brazil. In fact, since the beginning, since in the end of the 90s, 98, when I started to deal with, I started with competition law in Mercosur. It was, hot topic at that time. And then I was having these connections with people from Latin America, especially, and also from Europe, trying to understand how things were, how did they manage everything inside the EU to have the competition authority and the different states together dealing with the topics at that time. So at that time, we were talking about, leniency agreements, cooperation between authorities. But I start as an academic. I used to say that this is something that I am, right? A researcher. Doesn't matter if now I am working here at CADE, I'm still a researcher. And to have, good ideas and follow what everybody is touching and studying, it's so important to have the connections, right? I think now we have much more tools to do it, just like now we have this nice moment with Caio, Vinicius, and you all. For me, it's great because even though Vinicius and Caio, they live in the same country, we are in different states. And generally, when we are together, many people are together, so we don't have time to discuss things like we are doing today. But I think, first of all, to have the groups, I have a group at the University of São Paulo, the digital market. It's not only digital markets, but competition and also digital markets. And we try to go much more broader with some partnerships. So Vinicius is also with me at the Brazilian Institute for Competition and Innovation. And when we talk about innovation, it's huge, right? So now we are inviting people from different universities outside to have this kind of discussion. It's all about ideas and discussing ideas. And I know Caio do the same at FGV, and we had some meetings. He invited me. I was really glad to discuss some issues with Caio too. He's a very productive professor, and that's why for me it's always a moment that I can learn with my colleagues. And for you, I think we have the time. That today we just had a very tiny problem with the difference of the time, but we can handle it and we can do it more frequently. And now that University of São Paulo, they told me, Juliana, now you can invite again the professors from outside to come again after the coronavirus. So I will start to do it because it's good to have you here. And even though now we are here in an online conference discussion, it's not a conference, but online discussion, I think we should do it much more. And it's important to have, this kind of groups, then we can follow and be more regular to talk, not waiting one whole year to see you again at a scholar meeting. I think it's great, of course, but I hope to see you more. And I think we can do many things together inside the university.
Absolutely. Vinicius?
I think it's always a pleasure to exchange with professors and researchers from other universities. I think Brazil has like a community of antitrust scholars, researchers, and practitioners that are very close, maybe, but it's an important place to debate. And I don't know, in university in Brazil, I think it could have more work together. I think in Brazil we still have less cooperation and less joint initiatives as I think you can have it like in UK. I think in UK have more joint initiatives. I think transdisciplinary works and interdisciplinary works are also need to be more emphasized in Brazilian community and universities, and but have a lot of good initiatives. And I think competition law is you need to be interdisciplinary, at least with economists and with economic theory. So it's like more common and easy to see this happen. But in general, I think in Brazil, you have to work to have more incentives to do joint works and joint initiatives, my point of view.
Thank you very much, Caio.
I agree with Juliana and Vinicius. I think the exchanges are very, very important. I've been very engaged in exchanges both within Latin America and with US and EU. I think these are very important. And I think more and more we're building hubs, if you will, of exchanges. So if you think on Latin America, for example, we have in Chile, Centro Competência, that's doing great work, that's led by Felipe, and he is putting together great material about many different Latin American countries and holding different discussions. I think that's an amazing work. I've participated a couple of times, and now I'm going to participate again in August of a big event in Peru. That's a moot court that's put together there, and they have a whole day of conferences before the moot court takes place, and there are teams from different places in Latin America, so students. So that's also very interesting to have exchanges there. I'm seeing a lot of activity as well in Colombia. There is an association like IBRAC in Brazil. That's Association of the Antitrust Bar. And that has been, I think Felipe Serrano has been leading there for a while, and with very interesting debates. I took part in a couple of them. So quite interesting initiatives going on in the region. And also with the US, there is one group that I participate that includes also USC Gold in California with Danny Sokol there, and a few people from Canada as well that meet regularly. So I think these exchanges are quite nice. And of course, in Europe, Ascala is a big hub, and participating in Ascala and the exchanges in Europe are great. So last year I could bring Alison Jones from King's College for a couple of weeks of teaching in FGV. This year, Kristen Kirsting from Dusseldorf is going to teach a couple of weeks here as well. So I think these are exchanges that we need to improve, and we need to be connected. I think this is more and more a global issue, and experiences from different jurisdictions can teach lots of lessons. But also we're in a world that I think maybe 10 years ago, we were more focused on harmonization. Now I think we're more of a laboratory, that many different things are happening in many different places. So there's more fragmentation, but there's more learning going on. I think that's part of what I see. So when I look at Germany, 19A, at the UK bill, at DMA, at the discussions in the US, I think this is a big laboratory where different tools are being tested. We need to learn with them. We need to choose a different paths. So exchanges are even more important in a way that's not in a role that's not really a harmonization role, but a more fragmented and experimental role. I think that's where we're leading now.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Caio. So now we move to this traditional round where you are being kindly asked to share your views about what are the opportunities and challenges for students. How would you recommend them to deal with this new time, new reality, and maybe how to prepare for this ever increasing role of competition in digital markets? Vinicius, let's start with you this round.
I think it's hard to give advice, but I think one important thing I could say is that you need to to be interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. I think the idea of studying competition law and traditional economics, even traditional economics, is not be enough in this discussion. So I would advise students to try to go to discussions that are outside typical competition law debates and approaches, even maybe political science, social sciences, computer technology, because I think when you have a time like this, when you have more critical debate on foundations of competition law, as you, for instance, always has books and great articles about that, you have to be more open and to debate broader issues. And I think that's going to be like an important thing in the next years, like debate foundations and broad issues about competition law. And maybe in the future we'll go back to more typical studies, case studies, and more traditional approaches to competition law. But this time of debate and open questions and discussion, very broad discussions, I think this is maybe an advice.
Thank you very much, Vinicius. Caio Mario.
Oh, I think it's exciting times. I think students should be excited about competition law and should be prepared to a role that is this big laboratory that I was mentioning. I think we're testing new tools, we're creating new concepts, we're testing the boundaries of competition law, and I think that's pretty exciting. Probably the most exciting times in the past 20 or 30 years. So they should be engaged with these discussions. I agree that this brings multidisciplinary approaches as particularly important. I also think that more and more, if we're looking at competition policy, you can't just look at competition law and ex post tools or merger review. You need to think about a continuum, a spectrum that's a continuum of different tools, and think of regulation and competition law as tools of the same spectrum, the same toolbox. So it's a much broader view of what is competition policy and what are the tools available. Think about the existing tools, but also be prepared to create new tools, right? So it's really an exercise of institutional imagination, if you refer to Unger as a perspective here. So we're testing new tools, we're creating new tools, and we need new abilities for that. It's not about studying what the law has always been. It's about understanding the functions of the law and what new tools we may need to deal with the future. So I think that's really what I would focus if I was students right now in this new exciting time is being prepared to create the new tools.
Thank you very much, Caio. Juliana, I know you're late for an event, but we really look
no
forward
problem.
to hearing your views, your recommendation.
Thank you. Just adding, because nothing that was said here is something that I don't believe. I think Vinicius and Caio, they said several things that I would also recommend. But besides, what I think is different now from the time I was at the law school, we have the possibility to deal much more with different fields. I think the university is much more open to have this inside our groups. We have people from different fields, from computer science, economists taking care of issues that are very important related to behavioral economics. And also, what I think it's really new, I didn't have an idea about it, and now I can really see the importance, is the mentoring that we have inside the university and also inside some groups. We have this network, the Women in Antitrust, the one that I am one of the founders. Inside, we have a mentoring, and it's all to open the ideas and give some tips to the students. And I think the program is great. And also inside the mentoring from the government, from the next leaderships. And it's totally different because it's focused really in positions in the government, and we have mature people with some experience in important fields. But when you talk with the students, it's just like, you can start from the beginning and, we have a bunch of opportunities because they are so open, and sometimes they are so lost because they like everything or they don't like anything. And then you are giving some, advices and showing them where they can find, the group and the ideas that they need to go ahead, and also to be in love with the law, right? Because we have a difficult moment, of course, in every place we have sometimes that law is not really fancy, or you're not, living the best moment of the field you work. But we always have, thematics and cases, and we have, things happening around the world that involves you so much, and it's so nice to have, to see that nothing is boring at all, because it's a new thing that we are dealing. And I like to give this idea to my students every time I am inside, the classroom or during the videos. I would say I'm really happy to be here with you, because this is my best moment of the day, when I can share my ideas and I'm free and you are free and you can disagree. It's great. So I think with the movement that we have now, social media is a problem, but it's also a solution. It's a problem because sometimes they are so connected. It's so difficult to, take the attention, and we are always fighting for attention. But the other side, we can use the technology by, our side. And I think this is a real revolution for the professors. And I hope to be doing a good work with this. I'm trying to learn with my kids too. They are my two kids. They're very technological, so I am following them just to pick some tips and try to do the same at the university.
Thank you very much. Juliana Oliveira Domingues, Caio Mario Pereira Neto, Vinicius Klein. I'm very grateful to all three of you for this hour. We really had a very engaged and detailed conversation. Thank you very much. I learned a lot.
Thank you so much.